Now I'm delighted to welcome to the programme Matt O'Connor from Fathers for Justice. Everybody will know he's here because I managed to leave the fader up while I was getting him on air. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Pippa, how are you?
Very good, thank you. Lovely to hear you. And
Lovely to speak to you.
A lot to get through. You've had a very, very busy few months indeed at Fathers for Justice. I want you to start, though, in your own words, to tell people what Fathers for Justice is about.
We exist to basically campaign against fatherlessness in terms of kids growing up without their dads. In the United Kingdom, we have 1 in 3 children growing up without a father. That's nearly 4 million children affected. And in some of our inner cities, up to 75% of the children are growing up without fathers. So our campaign is addresses that issue. It also addresses the issue of fathers struggling to see their children through secret family courts. Every single day, roughly around about 200 children lose contact with their fathers in secret courts. So it's a really serious social issue, an unfolding social catastrophe, and regrettably, we've been campaigning now for 13 years, and we're disappointed that we haven't obviously got further in terms of getting the political support and the political will to try and change this really appalling social injustice.
Let's come to that in a minute, Matt. I mean, you mentioned there secret family courts. I was speaking to the MP John Hemming on Monday. It's slightly different issue around the secret family courts, but nonetheless, we touched upon just how compromising these courts are. But are we not right in believing then that none of these issues would come about if the parents involved in those parenting relationships could sort these problems out themselves? It should never get to court.
Well, it shouldn't get to court, but unfortunately, all it takes is one unreasonable parent. And a lot of parents, sadly, the law is prejudicial in its application against fathers. And generally mothers, not always, but generally mothers often seek to exclude fathers from the lives of their children. And that, in doing so, excludes the paternal family, so also grandparents go for double heartbreak. So, unfortunately, it's a fact of life that many mothers do not want fathers to be involved in the lives and the upbringing and raising of their children, for whatever reason that is. And relationship breakdown leads to family breakdown, and family breakdown has effectively become like a cancer, because you have these fractured families, you have the perversity of a situation in the UK where it's easier to look after somebody else's kids than it is to be a father to your own.
Yeah.
And that's a perverse tragedy. But that's the reality. The figures, as I've said, cost of family breakdown, £44 billion every year. That's more than the defence budget. So the scale of this problem is quite extraordinary.
And what, in your estimation, is the problem within the British family courts when it comes to denied access to fathers? Well,
it's not just a problem with the courts itself. With the courts are secretive. They have an unelected, unaccountable, unsackable judiciary. So they operate in complete secrecy. They probably make North Korean courts look quite progressive in many respects. And so they do not uphold a father's right to see their children. But what you find, and what we obviously found out fairly quickly, was that in terms of legislation, fathers have no right in law to see their children. That's quite extraordinary. The law doesn't recognise me as a father, and effectively says you have no rights to see your children, but you have an obligation to pay for them.
Yeah.
So effectively you become a sperm bank and you become a cash point. And the government's position is that you can abandon your children tomorrow, provided you pay. And that sends a terrible message out to fathers. It sends a terrible message out to our children who are growing up in homes without fathers. And the impact that has, and we see the consequences of fatherlessness time and time again. We have the highest rate of young offending in Western Europe. We have an explosion in antisocial behaviour. All these directly flow from the consequences of the fatherless nation.
So the emphasis is on maintenance being paid, and of course, rightly so, that the father contributes to putting a roof over the child's head and feeding that child. But it's physical needs taken care of, with no regard for the emotional needs. Now,
that's that. I mean, child support in my book, Pippa, is emotional and financial support. You can't divide the two.
Absolutely.
And you shouldn't.
But the impact, obviously the obvious impact upon the children, but the impact, let's say, upon a working father whose heart is wrenched by not seeing his children, who is expected to get up every day, go and continue to work to be able to earn the money to support his children, the children that he's not seeing. Now, most of the fathers that we know adore their children and would go to the ends of the earth for their children. But if they're denied access, it can really lead to some extreme, having to carry out something that's quite extreme to attract attention to the cause. And this, of course, is what Tim Harries has, in my opinion, very bravely done. I mean, he really put his freedom on the line. Tell us the story about Tim.
Well, Tim is a father. He's not seen his two daughters. I think one's 11, one's 13. He hasn't seen them for 4 years. And I think Tim had just run out of road. Mm-hmm. He'd been through the court system. The court said, you have no right to see your children. Tim had got to the point where he'd been to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal said, because they were concerned that he hadn't seen his children for such a long period of time, because of the delays in his case, which had been caused by the very court system that said he shouldn't see them, that he had no right to see them, and they basically said, that's the end of the road, mate. There's a 91-14 which stops him from going back to court again. And he hasn't seen his children in 4 years. He's done nothing wrong. This is the man who's done absolutely nothing wrong. He hasn't posed a threat to his children. There's nothing, there's no serious allegations against him. There's nothing. I mean, I've seen the case papers. This guy is a good guy. He's a good, loving father whose only crime was to want to see his two daughters. Now, I don't know about you, but I would do anything with reason for my children.
Absolutely. I mean, defacing a portrait of the Queen is nothing.
And Tim's action, people can be, and I can understand this, people can be rightly critical. He went to Westminster Abbey and he wrote help. And he was petitioning the Queen for her assistance. Now, he could have written a letter, which she wouldn't have heard about. I'm sure she got the message on this. And Tim's argument in court last week was that every judge in a family court that separates children from their fathers does so sitting in front of the Queen's coat of arms, royal coat of arms.
Right.
And we think it's right that we take peaceful, non-violent direct action to raise this issue, to bring awareness to this issue, because if we remain invisible, the truth remains hidden. And with a painting, I guess 100 years ago. Let's go back to compare this, because people say it's terrible. He's defaced the Queen's portrait, right? But I don't know. My children's mere priceless. So I start from that point.
It was interesting, actually, the coverage of what Tim Harries did, because initially it was kind of portrayed in the media as an act of vandalism, but clearly there was a lot of thought behind what he'd done, as you've just explained to our listeners, why he did it and why he chose to get his message across onto the Queen's portrait, and it makes sense to convey the message that way. And certainly the media seem to have become more empathetic towards him, and even the judge, in his summing up, as I understand it, last week, mentioned that he didn't see this as an act of vandalism.
Yeah, and I was in court when Tim was giving his testimony, and the prosecution barrister said to him, "It's about you," and he tried to demonise Tim, as all dads tend to get demonised. In the media, we're often demonised as deadbeats, as feckless, and he tried to demonise Tim, and Tim reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a picture of his two daughters and said, "It's not about me, it's about them." And I can tell you, we were in tears.
I can imagine.
And the whole, you could cut the atmosphere with a knife. The usher walked around, took the picture from Tim, and handed over to the members of the jury, and there was absolute silence. And it was a very powerful, moving moment, because that's what it comes down to, is when you strip somebody of any rights whatsoever, when you give them no voice, and we have no voice in our country, we don't have anybody in Parliament wants to take this issue because it's a taboo issue. What are you left to do other than engage in non-violent direct action? I draw a parallel with 100 years ago. The suffragettes were going around slashing paintings and taking far more dramatic action than we have. But I think you have a moral responsibility and duty to sort of try and find ways of campaigning and addressing this issue and getting into the headlines, because the media generally don't want to cover it. It really is a very unsexy issue. We struggle to get coverage. I mean, I know we get a lot of coverage when we do get it, but often that coverage is quite demonising in terms of the way it portrays fathers.
Let me move you on, Matt, and then talking about coverage to the incredibly clever controversial advertising campaign that you came up with at Fathers for Justice a few months ago, using the image of Kate Winslett, Halle Berry and Kim Basinger, with a fairly clear statement about what you were saying across the bottom. How did those... let me ask you to explain that then. For example, Kate Winslett, why did you choose to use her?
Well, Kate, we were very careful about how we produced those adverts. Kate Winslett had made very vocal comments saying that she didn't support 50-50 shared parenting, and that these are my children, like the children are her property, and they live with me, and they would never live with their dads. And that was in Vogue magazine, I think, in October of 2013. And we thought, it'd be very odd if we didn't respond to that, because we campaigned for, as a starting point, 50-50 shared parenting. So it'd be very odd if Fathers for Justice didn't respond to that very clear, unequivocal attack on shared parenting by Kate Winslett. But we responded with an advert I thought was very measured in tone, that just basically used her words and said, this is what she said, we don't agree with it, and that basically responsible parents should be promoting shared parenting. I mean, in a nutshell, that was what we did. Unfortunately, before we'd even published the advert, to be honest with you, Pippa, her agent was on the phone, saying this isn't accurate, and we're saying, well, if it isn't accurate, what did she say? And we'll happily amend the advert, and we won't run it if there's an issue with it. We were very reasonable to the point I called her agent up in Paris, to be honest with you, at my own cost, trying to resolve the matter. And then the next thing, about half an hour later, I think it was on a Tuesday evening, we had a legal letter from Schillings threatening legal action. So, which wasn't, reconciliation and trying to find a way to solve this problem. But it's clear since then that Kate Winslett stands by her comments. She hasn't retracted her comments or amended her comments. So we thought it was very legitimate for us to raise this as an issue. Here is a mother, here is a role model, a Hollywood mum, saying unequivocally, I don't like 50-50 shared parenting, my children live with me, and that's it. In her own words.
I see today I saw something in the press that she's come out and stated her support for working mothers, about how wonderful working mothers are. Of course, always with a pinch of salt for those of us who really are working mothers, and don't have the kind of...
She means Hollywood mums. I think she means Hollywood mums, Pippa. Are you telling me you're not a Hollywood mother? I'm disappointed. Well, what am I speaking to you? I don't
know. I couldn't help but think of Fathers for Justice. Do you think maybe she's, trying to garner favour with single parenting or something?
I'm sure. But hey, do you know what? We've all been single parents at one point or another. They say single parents as if somehow they got a monopoly on single parenting. Hey, I was a single parent. So the point, she's obviously trying to curry favour with exactly the sort of people who think that single parenting and excluding fathers is perfectly acceptable.
Now,
That's not what we... that's what we oppose. We oppose that. We believe in equality. We believe the best parent for a child is both parents, and that's why we take that view. And it's interesting that Kate's lawyers were very, very aggressive with us. Very threatening, and then we're going to sue you, and we're going to do this, that, and the other. And we held our nerve. We held our nerve. We said, look, guys, we've been as fair and as reasonable as we can do. If there's something wrong with what she said, or it's incorrectly being reported, we will withdraw the advert or amend the advert, and we couldn't have been more reasonable. And but it generated, as you say, quite a bit of publicity. And the tone of that publicity was also interesting, because it said we were attacking Kate Winslett. Well, we hadn't attacked. It sounds like we're taking a club hammer to her. There was almost
a feeling of how dare you use Golden Girl Kate Winslett, wasn't it? There was she might have 3 children by 3 different fathers, but how dare you attack this Golden Girl?
She's a sacred cow. Not literally, but it's like attacking a sacred cow. It's like, how dare you? And it's the Madonna, it's the Madonnification of mothers, and it just feeds into the scene that the whole time, as soon as you... And bear in mind, she'd attacked 50-50 shared parenting, and we were just responding to it in a very, very low-key, very rational way.
I noticed that the media did, when it was in the media, they always chose the photographs of her to accompany the article about Fathers for Justice, daring to use her name, with the sort of fully pregnant, fully breasted, rather mumsy-looking photo.
It was... Yeah, it said more about the media, I think, than it really said about us, and exactly the problems we face in this country in terms of trying to portray fathers or trying to challenge the status quo and the bigotry and prejudice which is inherent in the media coverage. And if you just think for a minute, if you took what Kate Winslett said and reversed it round so the mother became father, there'd be an outcry.
Absolutely,
there'd be an absolute outcry, and it just says so much that we can't even challenge somebody as a public figure for her attacking shared parenting.
Absolutely, and I mean somebody who is able to set an example, or to perhaps not set an example, that's a bit judgmental, but to actually...
But she's a role model, isn't she? I mean, she's a role model, and people will follow and will say, well, if Kate Winslett does it, it's good enough for me.
You used Halle Berry, you used Kim Basinger. We don't have time to go into details of that, but your campaign was fearless, and I did follow it through December, over the Christmas period, and there were times where I thought, my God, Fathers for Justice are going to go under with this. But she did withdraw her threat to sue you.
Yeah, she did. I mean, they backed off completely because they didn't have a leg to stand on, and we said that to Shillings, and we said, look, if you think you want to sue us, please be our guest. We welcome to have a day in court to talk about it. But they did back off, and that said, they've still come back to us and said, well, we're still within our right to sue you if you want to at a later date. But clearly, the advert was run. They didn't take any action. We may be running another advert at some point in relationship to this campaign. So we will continue to challenge people who don't support shared parenting. That's what we're a campaign group. That's what we campaign for. It'd be very odd if we didn't campaign for that sort of thing.
Let me ask you, Matt, before we run out of time, there weren't many media outlets that didn't cover the story in some way or other, and very often on the front page of papers such as The Times, or you were featured pretty much everywhere. You had huge coverage. What has it done for Fathers for Justice?
Well, I think the one interesting thing is, for the first time, we have got people just a little bit start thinking about, well, what is shared parenting? What is 50-50 shared parenting? Why have they raised this as an issue? And it has done a lot to get people talking about the fundamental issue of shared parenting. And that's something we've never got across before. I mean, people are aware that dads don't see their kids. People are aware of that. Fathers know the discrimination that's inherent in the system against them. But I don't think people have begun to think or start thinking about parenting as being shared or equal. And I think that was a significant step forward. We took a hell of a rap for it, but if we start a debate, if we start the fire and get people talking about the issue, that's all I care about, Pippa. That's all I care about. I just want people to think about what sort of country we want to raise our children. And I want our children to have the best of both parents, not the worst.
Yeah, because we know very well, Matt, don't we, that if children are brought up with a bad example, then fairly often that can turn into that example being repeated in their own adult life. It will be repeated,
it'll be repeated ad nauseum through generations, and that's the tragedy of what we've done in the UK. We've created a fatherless generation of children who will suffer dramatically because of the fact they've been deprived of a parent for no good reason, and there's a lot of people need to be held to account at some point for it. So I think, maybe in 5, 10, 20 years' time, people will reflect back on this time and go, what were we doing to our children? Really.
Well, if that happens, then it's certainly in no small part to you and your lovely wife Nadine, and of course Tim Harries, who is due to be sentenced on the 5th of February. Do you have any indication that he might serve time for this?
It hangs in the balance, I guess. Tim is tremendously. I've got to say, I'm rarely impressed. Very impressed. He's very stoical, very reserved. Has been great in a strength, and I think we are prepared if he does receive a custodial. We're prepared for that, and we'll deal with that campaigning wise. As you might expect, we would respond to that. We would regard that to be Tim to be a political prisoner, to be honest with you, in that kind of case. he may get suspended. We don't know, but the judge did indicate that he was going to look at it quite harshly. So we're prepared for the worst and hope for the best.
Yeah, and always to get something good out of a negative situation. If he is, I mean, I can already see I can see it already. Political prisoner. What a great thing for Fathers for Justice.
Well, everybody needs, people who are prepared to put their necks on the line.
Yeah.
And if it's Tim or it's somebody else, then we just keep pushing Pippa on every single avenue that we've got. We will just keep pushing on and on and on until we get equality for parents and bring fathers back into the lives of our children.
Matt O'Connor of Fathers for Justice, the Facebook page there, Fathers for Justice, the official campaign. Of course, you have a website as well of the same name. Thank you very much indeed.
Brilliant. Thanks. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
God bless.